Bueno, pues buenos días, gracias a todas y todos por estar aquí con nosotros. Estoy muy contento de ver a colegas del Departamento de Diseño, a compañeros, amigos míos del Departamento de Ciencias Sociales, pero sobre todo alumnos de socioterritoriales y algunos otros añadidos culturales que sin duda estaremos aprovechando esta gran oportunidad de escuchar al profesor Hom con una muy provocativa presentación. Yo soy Rafael Calderón, soy el jefe de Departamento de Ciencias Sociales y pues le doy la bienvenida al profesor Hom. Welcome to Mexico.
Thank you.
Professor, thank you so much for being with us. The undergrad, mainly all of our students are from the same undergrad, which is Socio-Territorial Studies. I often explain that it's like Geography 2.0.
Okay.
So that's the kind of bachelor degree that I would have loved to have when I was studying geography. But I think your presentation and the actual topic of your talk comes at a very important moment of our department because we are trying to push a lot of different strands of research on sustainability, and also UAM Coajimalpa has a core topic which is sustainability studies. So welcome to Mexico. It's an honor to have you here. And also, thank you to María. Gracias a María Moreno, nuestra profesora, colega, amiga del Departamento de Ciencias Sociales, por hacerlo posible. María realizó las gestiones para que pudiéramos tener al profesor Hom con nosotros el día de hoy. Y después de nuestra reunión, de la charla, nos iremos a una salita de la división por si algún estudiante incluso quisiera acompañarnos para explorar algunas alternativas de colaboración y a lo mejor financiamiento para proyectos de investigación colectivos y colaborativos. Entonces, muchas gracias. Gracias, María.
No, bueno, pues muchas gracias. Es un gusto ver tanta gente. Gracias por venir. Yo sé que en inglés es difícil, de verdad las animo a que si tienen en algún momento alguna pregunta, levanten la mano, no pasa nada y explicamos lo que acaba de decir el profesor Hom. Yo lo conozco hace varios años gracias a una red que se llama WC2, que quiere decir World Cities, World Class Universities, y yo estuve participando como parte de la UAM durante 11 años en esta red y teníamos, terminó con la pandemia desafortunadamente, porque había reuniones cada año y venían estudiantes de licenciatura, estudiantes de maestría a hacer una escuela de verano. Siempre había mucha controversia si era de verano o no, porque había gente del sur global, para ellos era invierno. Entonces, era una escuela que teníamos unos cursos y pues desafortunadamente esa red terminó, pero seguimos en contacto, el profesor Hom y yo, y ahora hay posibilidades, como decía Rafa, de hacer nuevos proyectos de investigación, sobre todo en relación con sustentabilidad. El profesor Hom es profesor en arquitectura, al igual que yo, que aunque estoy en socioterritoriales y en ciencias sociales, estudiamos los dos arquitectura, es arquitecto y entonces nos va a dar una visión desde el medio ambiente construido, desde cómo el producir edificios más sustentables, ciudades más sustentables, pues puede cambiar el medio ambiente. Él es profesor ha sido profesor y dean en la Universidad de CUNY en Nueva York, y también es fellow de la Asociación de Arquitectos de los Estados Unidos. Él quiere presentarse a él mismo con más detalle, entonces le paso la palabra y bueno, pues Kevin, please introduce yourself.
It's the one with the face. So you just press by the face, like in here, you see? There you
Okay.
go.
Oh, can you hear me? Yes, okay. So thank you very much for inviting me. Let me first say that I'm a Chinese American whose second language is English. So I am quite impressed to meet you where your second language is English and trying to understand me. So if we have a problem of understanding, please just let me know and I will repeat myself. It is something I've dealt with my whole life, so this is not the first time. Let me first introduce myself to you. So as the professor has mentioned, for many years I had a successful architectural firm in New York. Most of you are not architects, yes? Most of you are urban studies, political social studies,
More close to urban studies.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I will move a little bit away from the technicalities of architecture and talk about the broader perspective of the work that we do within the context of political, social, and economic conditions which shape the work that we do now. As we mentioned, I am currently I'm a professor at the City University of New York, and I was the dean of at the university for 8 years. As a practicing architect, I'm a fellow of the American Institute of Architects, which is the highest award that's been given to an individual. There are 100,000 members, and there are less than 2,000 fellows in the process. I've been a Fulbright scholar, and I have been a resident professor at the Polytechnic of Milan, at the University of Bologna, and the Technical University of Berlin. So communicating in different languages has been a problem for me for the last 5 years, but we will continue. Again, I lecture, and the bulk of my studies of the last several years has been involved with the built environment and the impact on essentially society and the political, social, and economic implications it has in shaping the way we deal with the world. My work has been as an architect at many of the universities, doing research buildings. So this is a building that was done at the University of Colorado. This is a building at Purchase College, which is a school of music and fine arts. This is a community center. Much of my work is involved in working with institutions. So I do not work for private clients. I only work for institutions which do the work of the community. It could be colleges, athletic facilities, community centers such as this. I've done a lot of sports activities. This is a building in New York which was developed in anticipation that we might have gotten the Olympic award. But we didn't, but I got the building anyway, which is good. Also, I've been an urbanist doing a lot of major master planning and development in urban areas. This is part of a large project that I was in charge of in downtown Los Angeles. It involved a multitude of buildings, as well as the 3 office buildings you've seen, but the Walt Disney Art Center, the Museum of MoCA is all part of this development. So this lecture talks about the increased responsibilities of architects and engineers in the built environment. And I will expand that more to talk about all the people who were involved in the shaping of the environment. I've tried to find a way to explain this particular concept of expanding responsibilities. So I look at it as an equation where we look at the sum of the parts of the equation, and each part of the equation has to be changed to get the same result because it's in a different location. So the issues that we have in dealing with the built environment are many. And if we use the mathematical equation, we might say that there are really 4 major elements which now compose what good design is. How many of you have taken math classes?
Math. ¿Clases de matemáticas, alguien?
Not too many, huh?
Not?
Okay, so this is all foreign. So each element or each factor represents something that you have to do. So if you were making something or cooking something, you would have various things and you add, and sometimes you put a bit more of one and a bit less of to get to the results you want. In many ways, good design is the same way now. We have a series of things we must do. Some things require more things than others to be done. This whole lecture really starts with the question of the existential threat of global warming. So I wondered how much of you, or how many of you have talked about the question of global warming and the threat it presents to humanity? Raise your hand that's yes or no. So only yes. So what causes global warming is the input of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So do you know the effect that carbon dioxide has in the atmosphere of greenhouse gases? And many times I say this with the assumption that you all know, but let me just sort of say CO2 and its related chemicals are highly stable. They're a result from the burning of hydrocarbons or gasoline and oil. It goes into the atmosphere and it stays there and it creates an insulation blanket. So when the Earth was created, the heat in the Earth would radiate into space through the atmosphere at a certain rate, and that would essentially dictate the climate. But now the CO2 is like a blanket. So imagine when you turned 5 years old, your grandmother gave you a coat and you put it on. The next year, your grandmother gave you another coat and you put it on top of that coat. And the year after that, you got another coat, you put it, and you kept putting these coats on. You would get hotter and hotter and hotter. That is what is happening to the planet. We are continually insulating the planet. And by doing that, the chemistry of the planet is changing. So this is a diagram showing the amount, the change in temperature from 1940 to current. Now, it's not much, but it shows a change in over 1.5 degrees centigrade. That is enough to essentially change the basic structure of the environment of the Earth. And that is what we are seeing now, that the conditions that we're seeing are being created by it. So one would say that the development of climate change is because of the development of CO2. And as far as the chemistry and science, it's true. But in part, in terms of human behavior, it's not. The real cause for global warming is the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution started in the 1750s in England. It created the prosperity that we all have today. The development of the steam engine, wood-fired, gas-fired engines, gasoline-fired engines, the development of large-scale technology at a global sense has essentially created the need for power to generate all the things. The way we live, the benefits of life that we have really come out of the last 150 years of existence. So think of your own short lives and think of the cell phone that was there when you were born and think of the cell phone that's there that is now. Think of the TV that was there then, think of the TV that is there now, which is no longer a TV. Think about your cell phone, all the power. Think of all the computers that control this. When you came today, think about all the cars on the highway that you met here. When you were younger, traffic in Mexico City moved around. Now, it's not. These are the signs of prosperity. The other aspect of this is we are all very greedy for good things and new things. So society makes something, invents it, makes it as fast as it can, as cheap as it can, and sells it to you. Then 2 years later, they give a better idea, they make something that's better, they sell it to you again, and you throw the first one away. So we are constantly creating things which require more power to operate, more power to manufacture, and we're discarding the rest. So the Industrial Revolution, while has promoted our health, our industry, has gotten into space, given us the internet, also has created the need for power, endless power. The endless power creates the need for CO2. As CO2 goes in the atmosphere and is changing the world. So for you, in terms of the ideas of political and social change, is the Industrial Revolution that has changed the planet. Is the CO2 is actually a byproduct of the driving mechanism, the social mechanism. Do you understand that? Did I make myself clear? Well, the faculty is saying yes. Students saying yes? So the United Nations puts their concerns out of global warming. So they talk about hotter temperatures, more severe storms, increased drought, warming and raising of the levels of the oceans, loss of species. We are essentially changing the ecological environment and eliminating places. There's not enough food. The fact that the Earth was designed and by us to function in terms of farmland in the 1750s. The environment has now changed and no longer favors the land use pattern we had when we established where farms would be, where cities would be. So all of a sudden, areas where people grew food are no longer available to it. There are more health risks associated with climate. and poverty and displacement are concerned. Because once all these things go, individuals and social systems start to break down, and people have to move for sustenance and for. So why is that an issue for architects in the built environment? Why is that an issue for you in terms of urban studies? Well, 37% of all global emissions come from the built environment. The act of building them, erecting them, occupying them, and tearing them down. So for every ton of carbon dioxide that is issued, we're responsible for 40%. And that responsibility is perpetual, because when you build a building or you build a city, it does not go away next year. So every year it continues to drive and produce it. So if you look at the pollution rates, for instance, in Mexico City, as Mexico City grew after World War II, the pollution rates and process came up. So that is why this becomes a responsibility of those of us who are involved in the built environment. The other aspect, this expanding role, and as I told you, with time, the role of the architect has changed. So when I was a student in your age, if I was to show a building, they would ask me 3 questions. 1, is it beautiful? 2, does it work? Can people go to sleep? And 3, is it expensive? That is all they asked. That is not the case now. So architects now are asked more and more things in builders and planners. One of the things what they ask is can your building withstand an emergency? If a hurricane comes through, if a power shortage occurs, if there's a windstorm that blows through, can your city withstand it? Now, we've seen the results of this in Los Angeles just several weeks ago. Los Angeles is an arid climate, much like Mexico City. They built in a certain way, depending on certain rules, but the climate has changed. In Los Angeles, it's drier. The winds are stronger from the Santa Ana winds from the coast. It created a momentary issue for 5 days, which burned down some 10,000 houses. In New York, we had a hurricane about 12 years ago called Hurricane Sandy. Hurricane Sandy lasted for 1 day. We are still repairing the damage from Hurricane Sandy to this day. So now, in addition, so another responsibility besides it being beautiful and being working is can it withstand a catastrophe? You have earthquakes in Mexico City. It's another example of. So this responsibility now has gotten larger beyond the structural to deal with the unpredictable climate change issues. So if I was to do a chart and say, what are the expanding concerns? Which are the expanding concerns for society, for governmental officials, for businesses? We would see that originally in the 70s, it was energy conservation. In 1970, and I know most of you here are not here in 1970, the Arab countries put together a cartel, and they limited the production of petroleum oil, and the prices rose. So at that time, the concern was energy conservation for monetary reasons, purely economic reasons. As time has gone on, we realized the need, the impact of CO2. So now we've expanded to not only conserve and minimize the use of fossil fuels, we do it for more than economic reasons. We do it because it creates hothouse gases. So we're now looking for a net zero response, where your buildings create no carbon dioxide. Now think about it. It means you cannot have a gas-fired stove, you cannot have a fireplace, you cannot have an oil burner. How do you design a building so it does not generate CO2? The next is resiliency. We always had designed for earthquakes and maybe some floods, but now it becomes a standard discussion of what emergencies your building would have to resolve. Going further, we're now talking about materials and scarcities. Coming back to the discussion of the Industrial Revolution, we build a lot of things. If you go past all the stores and all the streets, you can see all the things we build. The buildings that we have get older. So buildings last 50, 60 years, the air conditioning breaks, the heating breaks, we have to repair it. So we're looking to, now need to design buildings that aren't thrown away. In the past, a building would survive 50 years. It would get old and inefficient. We just tear it down and do another one. We can't do that anymore. We need to figure out how to essentially continue the buildings to operate at a high level of performance. So we now design for obsolescence. How do we make sure that the building continues not to create any CO2, that it continues to deal with changing environmental conditions? We also look at programmatic changes. In the last 100 years, the number of building types have changed. 100 years ago, there was maybe a train station, an apartment building, maybe a hospital. Now there are multiple buildings. There are computer centers, there are chemistry laboratories, there are various wellness centers, delay facilities, coliseums, movie houses. Buildings are always changing. We can't tear down a building and throw it down and build a new one for the function. The buildings have to be adapted for change. Also change in the human condition. Once we had very large families, and everybody had a nice dining room, and but now we have small families. People want 2 cars in their garage. People live longer, so the needs of a building to deal with someone who's older becomes an issue. So we're dealing with that change. And the last change we're dealing with is all the stuff we throw away. So where does all the stuff go that we throw away? Landfills. And what happens to the landfills? It basically destroys the property that was put on. And all the energy and all the carbon dioxide that was used to create that is lost. So as we throw this table away, it goes in the landfill. All the CO2 that was created to make this table will now have to be repeated for the next table. So there is a great loss. So this is the cascading responsibility that architects and planners now feel. So all of these now are the responsibility of the building that we designed. So in the past, I would design a building that was beautiful, that was a program, and I could budget. And I would give them the key, and I'd say goodbye, and I'd walk away. Now I have to think how that building will be used for the next 50 or 100 years. And the person who is asking me to design it asking me those same questions. Here you can sort of see the political implications of what I've just talked about. These are a series of international treaties and agreements which have occurred chronologically, which support the discussion I've just had about the expanding needs. So you can see here, the first was the Arab oil embargo, going on acknowledgements, the Kyoto protocols, and moving on to the European Green Acts. And what you'll see is in governmental action is you'll see growing legislative directions requiring the performance of a building before it's approved. So again, this is part of the governmental consensus that's involved. And when the government recognizes things, that means professionals have to acknowledge it, commercial owners have to acknowledge it, local governments have to acknowledge it, and then there's a reinforcement that goes to continue to monitor it. So laws are in place. So this is part of the cycle in which these concerns become institutionalized and become the responsibility of the government to execute and maintain the health and balance of society. So I ask the question now, is everybody still understanding me? The faculty yes says yes.
¿Alguna pregunta? Sí.
Sí, sí. We asked a question on the use of iron for buildings. So apparently some legislations, when you're planning building new buildings, you need to provide more material than is going to be needed in the end. And so our question is whether an approach like yours might help avoid that waste of material.
Well, I will talk later in the conversation about material. But let me say, in selecting materials, the first consideration is safety. So you may need a certain amount of material to make the building safe against earthquakes and loads. The second is we are now concerned about finding material that doesn't require much energy, is renewable. So iron is not renewable, but lumber or wood is renewable. So we now make these choices about the renewability of material we can find and an endless commodity. So the earth has a finite amount of iron, but it can't have an endless amount of wood. So we think about that. The third issue we have is we should never throw anything away. So imagine we are all, this is what most people say philosophically, imagine we are all born and will live on a boat forever. And everything on the boat is all that we will ever have. How do you continue to live on that boat? So you continue to use the thing on the boat, so you never throw everything away. You find another way to use it. That's recycling. I will talk more about that here. But that is, again, part of the expanding criteria and concern that we have. And the realization that we now have about what the world, how the world has conducted itself, and how the world should conduct itself in the future. Okay? Good.
There's another one. Yeah.
I have a question. The government manager is the real problem in this work, in this thing?
Who, funding me or funding who? What do you mean? That's a professional question. Architects are paid to do the project. So in terms of ethical responsibility, we look at now, and as a professor, I talk to my students and I talk to you now, you have a responsibility beyond the amount of money that you make, the amount of money your client will make, to design something that will meet the needs of your clients, and your clients are really humanity. So when you design a school, an auditorium, or if you're in the government and you say, I want a new school or I want a new road, you have the ethical responsibility saying, yes, we need to do this. Yes, we need to do this way in the best possible way, so not only does it help them to do what the task, but it does not harm the planet. So all of us now are dealing with the ethical question of, economy versus social responsibility. And you all are now sitting in the middle of this battle. Your generation is really dealing with this. Before then, economics drove everything. If it could be economically viable, that was enough. Now, if it's economically viable, the question, is it evil? Is it good? And is it worth it to the value of the planet long term? Because we will pay more for a long-term mistake than we will for paying to do the right thing now. So that's the ethical question that I lay at your feet. For the next 40 years, until you become old like me, you will have to every day ask the question, is this the right solution? Not for the narrow band of product or necessity, but the greater plan of human good. That's my end speech, though.
Spoiler.
So again, this illustrates, the fact that governments now are understanding this. So this is a picture of New Delhi, and on the right side is a picture taken during the pandemic. On the left side is a picture taken during a normal day. I could have found a similar picture from Mexico City. Right? The pandemic was a remarkable and unique event. It's a global event, I think, that has rarely ever happened. It is an event which the entire world participated in simultaneously. Everywhere, everyone on this planet knew there was a pandemic. Everyone stopped doing what they were doing and had to deal with the restrictions of the pandemic. Some better, some worse, but everyone was aware. And I've yet to find an event in humankind where everybody on the planet knew what was happening. we could have the Black Plague, but Western Europe would know about that. We might have the Soviet Revolution. You might have something, a major earthquake in South America. But this is the one event in the history of man, with the exception of the birth of Adam and Eve, when there were only 2 people, where everybody knew what was going on. So what happened is a remarkable thing, is that we stopped doing things. We all sort of said, okay, I'm going to go home, I'm not going to go shopping, and we had the time to think. We started to think, what is the world we have now? What are the problems the world we have? And during this period of time, we slowly became much more aware. That's the youngest student we have.
Yes. She's our youngest student.
Okay. Very, very advanced. So we discovered, and in the process of the pandemic, and this is another subject I talk about in terms of the post-pandemic impact on cities. And I'm not talking about the health aspect, but cities have changed the way they are, or now wondering how they should change. So the pandemic started to introduce, one, we stopped doing things the way we did, if we did them at all. 2, we started to figure out how to do things that we needed to do, but in different ways. So I was stuck in traffic coming here, and I was talking to Professor Moreno, and I was thinking, if I stuck long enough, I could take my computer on, I could turn on Zoom, and I could give the lecture from the Uber on Zoom. We were finding different ways to do the same thing. As things went on, governments realized there was some benefit to doing things differently. Maybe everybody didn't have to drive to the meeting. Maybe you didn't have to go shopping. Maybe you could go to school, from Guadalajara if the program was in Mexico City, but you wouldn't have to come. So all of a sudden, we had time to think about the new vision of what could happen in the world. So that's another thing that has happened, is that we collectively had a chance to go and talk to each other without making mistakes. We're trying to find the right way. So I'm not sure what the outcome will be, because we are still coming out of that. I drive around Mexico City, I look at the signs for rent, for rent, for rent on the office buildings. I'm thinking, are they all at home on their computer? Or are they in El Salvador or in someplace working, or in Texas? So,
Can I just say something about that? Because yesterday I was looking at the vacancy rates in offices in Santa Fe, and after the pandemic it was over 30%, and that is thousands of square meters that were empty and underutilized. And just now it's only about 20%. And people are going back to the offices, traffic is worsening, and we have other problems. But I think for the first time, I've been checking what happens with the real estate market in offices in Santa Fe for the last 4 years. Also with Rocio, we have this large project on COVID and its effects on the city, labor, and real estate markets. And I found it quite remarkable that the prices are going back, like the prices for office space are going back to the same levels that they were before the pandemic. And people are expanding their offices, are asking for larger office spaces because they are not allowing so much of, home office. And I think we have to think about that and the effects that that has in the environment, and what are the other costs and consequences of this change. So I just wanted to mention that, since you were talking about the office space.
And it's something that I think we're all wondering about, because commercial offices and the way businesses are run are economic questions. If you have, for a person, when I had my architectural office, I had 20, 25 people working. Everybody had to have a desk. My son is an architect. Here they have more people, but they have less desks than they have people. But they say, you come Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you come Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So all of a sudden, for the same amount of people, they have less office space, which means that the office building developer has less buildings. But it also means we burn less fuels for buildings. People don't have to go to work every day, so they burn less fuel for transportation. The people work at home, they have more time for their personal life. Their personal wellness might be better. So these are complex questions which the answer is not clear. But it's intriguing to imagine what would happen. And I can talk about some other experiments that are going on in Western Europe about that as well. So, so again, I think I've tried to point out that this equation of sustainability is involved in many parts. So there is actually the design of the building. Part of it is acknowledging change. Part of it is trying to recycle and reuse. Part of it is dealing with the damage that's been done and trying to undo it. So again, past, if it was beautiful, it was okay. Not anymore. It's larger. So there are 4 categories I suggest my students as architects to think about. One is to rethink how buildings are designed, to consciously be aware of what they need to do in the building to not only meet the beautiful and functional part, but all the aspects of sustainability, environmental impact. 2, the responsibility to restore the things that are damaged to their condition. So we look at the natural habitats, the landfills, how do we restore them? To reuse and recycle and prepare for demolition. So again, we're all on that boat, and we only have the things that we have. So nothing can be thrown away, everything must be reused. And the last part we've already talked about is resilience. Everything that we design must survive damage. Plus, they used to say that climate change is coming, the issues will happen if we don't perform in a certain way. Well, the reality is we've passed the tipping point, as it's known. We are now in a situation where the planet is in a motion of readjustment, and we have to readjust to the planet. And it means that many of the things that we have in place don't work as well. If you go to Miami, Florida, the streets will flood on a bright, sunny day because the water level of the Atlantic Ocean in that area has risen, and it now exceeds the basic datum of Miami Beach. So you could be there, sun shining, you're putting on suntan lotion, and you can be standing in 7 inches of water in the middle of downtown Miami. Stories you've heard about Venice, places, all coastal cities. So the 2 aspects that you should be aware of is, 1, urbanization is continuing. People like to live together. If you live in Mexico City, you know that already. Right? 2, most of the established cities in the world are along edges of water, because water is always the means, the simplest and fastest and cheapest means of transportation. So cities like New York, Miami, London are always by water. So those cities are all being challenged now. So of the vast majority, and then if you look at the underdeveloped countries, they're in the Pacific Rim areas, many of their countries are literally below water level. And they are now dealing with essentially how do you essentially take a civilization, 10, 20 million people, where the place is always going to be flooded. So those are the 4 categories which make up the attributes of this equation. So does everybody get that? 4 pieces? Raise your hand if you don't get it. Okay. Nobody raised their hand? Oh, good. So again, this is just, and the factors that, and so each factor is there, and we have to change it. So if you had never been to Mexico City or New York, and looked at a picture, you said, well, these cities kind of look alike. If you look at the statistics, size of the city about the same, population's the same, metropolitan area is about the same. New York's a little more dense. Mexico City is a higher elevation. Transportation looks a lot the same. And if you looked at the problems of Mexico City and New York, there would be similar problems, but for different reasons with different requirements. We have rising sea levels. We both have air pollution. We have heat issues. We have extreme weather. We have hurricanes, and you have droughts. We talk about resilient infrastructure. We talk about public transportation expansion. I am amazed when I saw the first gondolas in Mexico City, and suddenly said, this is interesting. And again, New York has the ability to dig underground because we're on rock. Mexico City is harder, and also the density and the way property is used, it's potentially politically or physically harder for you to build Air pollution is an issue, affordability and sustainable growth. So the same categories are there, but we have different requirements. So again, coming back, sustainability, the factors are the same. The conditions that change how we deal with it represent the areas. So what are the existing conditions, how much you consume, the technology that's available, the human behavior. For instance, in New York, we have the ability to have things delivered to us quite easily. So Amazon, in terms of delivering goods to us, is quite successful. So we have a significant drop in retail sales rentals. Stores don't go out of business, but they stop renting stores. Your postman is coming to deliver boxes. Mexico City, I think, does not have the culture for people to come and drop boxes in. So your retail remains the same. So it's different. Communications, technology, human behavior. All these things are different for each level. So the conditions change how you address the factors. I'm talking more to the architects at this point. So again, this is what I'm trying to say in these things. So when we think about it, at any level of policy, these are the things that we think about. So this the next part is for architects, so I'm going to go very fast through it, unless you want me to slow down. So we always talk about the program of the building. What does the building do? So when we look at a building and say, is it a laboratory, is it a house? How does that building function? We look at the building and say, how do we rethink how that building's working? So we look at certain passive design, smart buildings, various things which minimize the use of electricity and power, maximize the use of materials, minimize the impact on the environment in terms of capturing water, and we deal for the future. So in some cities, we would be capturing rainwater wherever possible. In other cities, we're trying to drain the water off as quickly as possible. The methodology really is looking at these various elements within the building in terms of the site planning, program evaluation, the concept. So again, these are architects, but architects would think about how the building might sit and how it would work in the area, how these pieces go together to create the structure of the building. We would then establish sustainability expectations. You say, okay, we now have a building. What things can we put into this building to make it sustainable? Should we put in solar cells? Should I put windmills? Should I put water containment capturing? Should I have bicycle racks? Should I build this without any parking so no one can drive here? They have to find their way. In New York, it's very hard to build a parking garage in New York City because New York City does not want any cars in New York City in the center. And now we have congestion pricing, so they charge you to bring your car in, and they don't build parking lots. So this is how the government exerts policy, which then exerts use and cost on the user. Thank you for agreeing. Yeah. We look at solutions from the biggest concept to the smallest concept. The biggest is the building, the smallest is something like a bicycle rack. We look at how the structure of the building designs as a concept. We look about how we might create flow and concepts that would work. We look at new ways of dealing with the outside of the building that would protect it. Solar control. We look for green materials. We look for things that are like bamboo now is like one of the most popular materials for furniture because it grows so fast. It's grass. It's a weed. And so you can, in the time it takes for a tree to grow, you can harvest tens of thousands of crops of bamboo. We try to, avoid using certain types of materials. We look at coordinating the entire system of building to achieve what we call a net zero effect. If we can manage to be very clever, we can design buildings now that do not create any CO2, which is remarkable given how much buildings can create. This is a diagram of how parts of a building age. So an average building lasts 40 years, but almost all the parts will essentially become obsolete within 20 years. So if you look at any building that's 25 or 30 years old, it's functioning in an obsolete, non-efficient manner. So there's two issues. One is economically inefficient for the owner, and two, environmentally, it's inefficient for the population. In the past, again, the architect would give you the building, and it would be great for the first 5 years. 10 years be okay, 15 years not so good, 20 years, the architect is long gone. Now we're asking the architect to be there mentally for the entire period. Finding clever ways to build, using natural environment to offset the use of energy. So natural light, offsetting the use of electricity for light. Behavior modification, for those of you in political science, and what can you do to make people behave better? What things can you put in place? And then innovation. Creating solar cells, bringing sun where it doesn't go with mirrors. These are all things that people are talking about. And construction, building on site with various 3D printers. So, I've been experimenting and discussing building new communities in places like Africa, where there are very few industrial supports. You can't go down the street and buy a tile. You can't go a mile and buy a bathtub. But we have 3D printers now. So imagine that you're in the middle of some place hundreds of miles away from any store. You go there and you start flying in and bringing in 3D printers and large bags of plastic pellets. And you start putting the program in, and you just start essentially making the buildings and making the toilets and making the sinks and making the walls. It's highly energy efficient. It allows civilization to come with no transportation costs. So these are new ways to sort of create things which in a responsible way. Recycling for the future, finding ways to change buildings, deal with their obsolescence is part of the economic change. McKinsey, which is the major financial planning group in North America. So if McKinsey is considered like the Dark Emperor or the Black Knight. He deals with just making money. That's all they're concerned about. McKinsey says that if a company is not dealing with sustainable management systems, they will be out of business in 2 decades. So the economics side has swung over to saying, if you want to make money and you want to be successful and you want to essentially perpetuate your business, you have to have this agenda in place. Because we're running out of materials. We consume, the way we consume, would need almost 2 Earths to deal with the materials that we need. By 2050, it's estimated that the Earth will consume more goods than 3 planets could provide. So obviously this is unsustainable. We need to find ways of recycling. 40% of all construction materials and waste is never recycled. It's just thrown into landfills. Here you can see the value of a replacement. If you reuse an entire building, there's a high level of value. If you recycle the parts, there's less of that because the energy of putting it together. So this is the sustainable wheel that we want. This is the result of all your laptops and iPhones. This is what happens to them. The vast majority are so how do we correct this, and how do we find a system that's economically viable, that works? And we're looking at that in architecture and building quite a bit, because of the 40% consumption. So many of the discussions is to end the ownership of buildings. So in the past, we would design a building, someone would buy all the materials, a contractor would build it, we'd finish it, the owner would own it, and he would now be responsible for that building forever. And if he took good care of it, that was great. If he didn't take care of it, that was bad. But he was the sole point of contact. The chain of responsibility began and ended with that one person. Apple has sort of been one of the people who now have introduced the new chain of command. So if you buy an Apple phone, you're one of the rare people who do. Most of you buy or lease an Apple phone. And then after 2 years, Apple says, I got a better phone. You give me your old phone, I'll give you the better phone. So why does that benefit Apple? Well, one, obviously they're creating a better product which attracts you to buy it. But if you recycle an Apple phone by tossing it in the garbage, very few people can use those parts. But Apple can use every single one of those parts. So Apple says, okay, here's a new phone. Give me your old phone. Apple now no longer has to seek raw materials because they've got your phone. So they take your phone and they reconstitute it, and it becomes the next phone they will trade with you. So this is a chain of custody, which we are thinking now applies to buildings. So let's say you have a building, and the building has windows outside. Most windows after 20 or 30 years, between one reason or other, become obsolete. What if the owner didn't own those windows? He leased the windows from him. So for 20 years, he would collect from me a monthly check for leasing the windows. So then after 20 years, I said, lease is over, I'm taking the windows back. Oh, and they said, oh, would you want some new windows? You have to sign another lease. I would take the windows back, I would rebuild the windows, the same glass, send them back. He continued to pay me, but he wouldn't be paying as much in the beginning because he's not buying, he's leasing. So for those of you who have leased a car, you lease it, you don't pay the full price, you give it back. So this is one of the methods that people are talking about in terms of economic viability and responsibility. It's a chain of custody because it becomes an economic incentive to follow money. It's not a good thing, it's a money thing. So that's essentially the world we live in and the thing one has to consider. For buildings, it's the same thing. If we can deconstruct and reuse materials over again rather than start from scratch and throw buildings away, it's a far more efficient way to deal with things. And this applies to impact on infrastructure and good design. Restoration of natural systems. I'm going long. Should I do
Don't
fast?
worry, we still have an hour to.
Okay. Okay. So, so restoration is one of the responsibilities we have is to get the planet back to where it should be. So when we build the buildings, we affect parts of the planet, large and small. So part of the equation is to consciously try to restore the planet to a system that supports the natural systems. So what we don't want to do is on the left. What we do want to do is on the right, is in cooperation and integration with the built environment, create the natural environment. And that goes for everywhere, anywhere, any place, including on top of roofs. Sustainable landscaping solutions are replicating or creating a new version of the Earth's environment. Resiliency I've talked about, but again, it's dealing with the problems that we've created for ourselves, which are not going to go away. And that becomes part of the equation that we have to deal with as builders. So that's a picture of Hurricane Sandy. Everything essentially was underwater for 8 hours, which is not a long time. But everything was damaged when we came out. The island of Manhattan, now we are redesigning the landscape of the island of Manhattan to be biologically and environmentally closer to what an island should be. So it does flood, it floods over the areas that are green. We're reducing the heat sink of the island. So the resiliency. So that's the formal part. I'm going to go through, most architects I show a series of pictures because they're more interested in looking at the projects. So I will quickly go through that and that will end it, if that's okay. She just suggests everything, I don't touch it. So this is if you've been to New York City, this is the High Line. This has been Mark said. The High Line was a train track that went through Manhattan. It delivered to all the factories that once existed. It was abandoned and just left fallow, so it was a steel structure that sat there. And it ran a fair distance of the island. And for years, people said, we'll tear it down. It just sat there. But then someone said, we should restore it and use it as an element, as a park. Now, Paris has done the same thing. But in New York, it was quite surprising in the result. It restored the natural, but it also became a major environmental and economic incentive. Some of the greatest areas of economic development around the High Line. So here was something that people enjoyed. It was a wellness thing, but it generated huge amounts of money. I mean, like billions of dollars were coming in from this thing. So again, one of the lessons to be learned, if it's good and makes money, it will happen. If it's good and doesn't make money, it's going to be much harder for it to happen. So finding the way to exercise and plan. This is a housing project that was built in France, outside of Paris, and it was an area where they had a lot of 1960 buildings. It was nicknamed Alcatraz, which is named for a famous prison in the United States. So they went ahead and said, we're going to make certain requirements of the development, that there had to be so much green space, the water had to be conducted, and we had to bring back natural species and natural plants. So the development of the property really was an integration of what was needed for housing, affordable housing, as well as instating a natural habitat, which would essentially minimize the impact on the city, minimize the impact in terms of resilient solutions, and also provide a healthier environment in terms of air. This is a project in Paris by a very famous team. It was built in the 50s. It's a building that really had become very obsolete, but people live there. So when you want to do something new, it's always a problem if you tear it down. What do you do with all the people who are in the building? Well, they said, you know, the building structure is there, people living there. Let's see if we can change the building while people are living there. So they developed a program where they essentially clipped onto the outside of the building additional space, which created a solar protector and an environmental protector, but also acknowledged that the families living there were older and had different needs. So the building now became larger and different structured. They created a method to essentially attach. They created a whole series of new spaces and secondary spaces for living, which also were environmentally managed spaces. And then so the building now, instead of being a crumbling mess, and nobody moved. Everybody continued to live in the building. This is the death of Penn Station. This is a famous train station in New York that was destroyed or demolished to build a new stadium in 1972. This is the new stadium on the right, not nearly as attractive as Penn Station. And everyone in New York went crazy when they saw the new building. It was so ugly. So all the preservation rules came into place about how to preserve it. So a lesson was learned about the value of beauty, but also the value of reusing something. So behind it is the old post office, which is on the left. Well, if people don't use the post office much anymore in the United States. We have email, we have FedEx. So they said, well, this is right behind where the old station was. Says, well, let's move the station to this building. So they essentially took the building, which was obsolete, and said, let's recreate the station that we tore down. And this is the design they have. You can see the lower level. And this is the new station. So this is an example of adaptive reuse. All those bricks, all that steel was preserved. It's given a new life. So it's not a post office, it's a train station. But here we've saved the carbon imprint, we've done a better land use, and we've kept the cultural significance of the building. So then, again, this is the lesson I give to students. This is one of my projects early on. I was asked to go to a university in the state of New York, and on the site was this building. And it had been abandoned for 10 years, and he said, I had to build a new community center development. And looking at it, I said, well, rather than tear it down, let me see if I can build around it and expand it. So what I did was build a series of attachments around that building and renovated the small building inside. The spaces in the original building, which were short, and I used for those functions which could be dealt with there. But the spaces that didn't fit in, I built additional spaces around them to create that. So here was a case where all the energy and all the materials and all the cost of the original building were preserved, and yet we managed to essentially meet the needs of the program, and it's not too ugly, and it's on budget. This is a building done by William McDonough, and if you haven't read his books, Cradle to Grave or Cradle to Grave, he talks about the circular economy. So the concept of cradle to grave is the linear economy. You're born, and then you're died and buried in the landfill. Cradle to cradle is you're born and you're reborn. You're reborn. So this is philosophy. He was commissioned by NASA to develop a new research center. Well, NASA is the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. So change is in their character, right? So they said, build us a building that we can disassemble and rebuild somewhere else, or use the parts, because we know we're going to change. So he built this building. Every part comes apart. Every part can be taken out. Every part is inventoried. So that essentially you can deconstruct the building into a series of defined piles, and they can be used somewhere else. So the steel here, the iron here, could be used perpetually. So this is sort of the big version of the Apple phone, right? This is a project I did in Virginia. So the project is a series of buildings there, and then around it is a series of parking lots. Virginia has no mass transit. So students would come to camp, everybody would drive to campus. They would park in the parking lot, and when they went to another class, they'd drive their car to the other part of another parking lot. So sustainability wasn't that a big thing here. The other aspect, it was a tidal city in Norfolk, Virginia. It's right on the coast. So when a hurricane came, it would push all the water up the estuaries where the campus was and flood the campus. The rain would continue up, and then after the storm, it would come back down again and flood the campus on the way out. So it flooded in and out. So this is a sunny day at the campus. So they said they wanted me to build a new building on the campus, and they gave me those stars as the places I could go. So one star was a large empty area. But if I built on that, I would eliminate the ground area for absorbing water, and I would be using up more natural terrain. If I use the other stars, I would be tearing down existing buildings and putting buildings and losing all the material. So if you were thinking, if you were an architect, where would you put the building? Any would-be architects out there? Is there a good answer to this? So I'm there, and the client is saying, here it is. And I'm thinking, none of these are good answers. But they need the building. And this is a problem that you have everywhere. Sometimes there's only so much space available and where the building should go. So I decided to build a building on top of the water. So the idea here is that I wouldn't take any land away for sports. I wouldn't destroy any of the buildings. And the building that I would get would essentially be on top of something that's used for essentially draining off. So the building could never flood if it was high enough. It was kind of over the toilet. It would never flow. So here's the development. The other aspect of it is students no longer had to drive from one building to another. They could walk across the lake through my building to the other building. So it became the hub of the wheel. So that's how it was developed. Another project, which is, this is Norman Foster's project in Berlin. And he was trying to adapt the colors and allow a lot more sunshine into the building and to make it more energy efficient. So he created this dome of materials and fabrics over it. So this is another level of innovation. And here you can see that concept sketch, how he imagined it to be, and what it came out to be. This is, again, an ethical question I raise. This is two famous architects of the 50s who designed a building for what's now Chase Manhattan Bank, which is the 7th largest bank in the world. Right? It was maintained by them for many, many years. It has 1 million square feet of land in it. About 7 years ago, they said, we'd like to have a nicer new building. So they said, let's tear this building down, and we'll build a building that's 50% builder at 1.5 million square feet. They promised they would recycle all the material of the building, which they did. The new building would be energy efficient, not that the old building wasn't energy efficient. And they made a whole list of criteria. But the dilemma really is, this is a very expensive demonstration of net zero design. Because one could argue that they could have modernized the building they had, which was perfectly good, minimize the impact of building 1.5 million square feet in one of the densest cities in the world, and they could have built another building 3 blocks away that met their needs. So while it functioned in terms of science and engineering properly, ethically, all that steel had to be taken down, had to be moved away, all the carbon dioxide, the disruptions to traffic, which is unmeasured in terms of everybody sitting in their car waiting to get around that spot. So when you're doing these projects, even though money can buy you a good solution, ethically, is it the right solution? Is it better to preserve with equal performance than build new for prestige? So I think, so that comes to the closing remarks, which you've all heard already. So this really talks about the new global philosophies of circular economy, how we essentially reuse things, keep things in play, live on that boat with all the materials. The reality is our clients are the people who inhabit it and the planet itself. So our clients are not only just the people, it's actually the planet we take care of. So now we can start. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, lots of different things to be discussed, lots of points, and I have a couple of questions, but first, maybe I'll open the floor for the students, if that's okay. No sé si tengan alguna pregunta que les mueva el tapete, o empiezo yo, o disparo primero. Ok. Pueden hacerlo en español, se las traduzco, o si se avientan en inglés, mejor. ¿Por qué no se pasan enfrente para usar el micrófono? También por la grabación en línea, porfa. Pero, pues, préndelo. Ahí está.
Bueno, sí, yo tengo más que nada como una pregunta acerca de lo que estuvimos viendo sobre lo del cambio climático y la construcción verde. ¿Ya listo?
Ya.
Ok, sobre la construcción verde y todo eso, ¿no? De que más o menos de que implementar en las construcciones que sean un poco más verdes y sustentables. Yo creo que, bueno, en lo personal, yo siento que no sería como tan viable. ¿Por qué? Porque nosotros lo hemos visto aquí en la Ciudad de México, de que tenemos un déficit de agua, en el suministro de agua. Entonces, obviamente, crear esas como edificaciones implicaría un mayor riesgo, un mayor consumo de riego. Yo creo que más que nada como que, bueno, siento que en lo personal y más o menos como mi perspectiva, como que el objetivo sería más que nada como que destinar más a las, como que reducir la mancha urbana, la zona de construcción. ¿Para qué? Para destinarlo a los mantos acuíferos. O sea, de que yo creo que conviene mejor que se regeneren los mantos acuíferos y obviamente tener como sistemas interinos del tratamiento de aguas que usar los mismos edificios para tener como una como reemplazar la zona forestal con edificios que de forma natural. Yo siento que lo ideal es como ya detenernos y pararnos a la expansión urbana.
¿Quieres o yo? Vale.
Bueno, creo que es importante decir que las plantas no todas necesitan la misma cantidad de agua y que hay muchas plantas que pueden sobrevivir con muy poca agua. Piensa en el desierto, ¿no? Que hay muchísima vida, por ejemplo, en Baja California. Entonces creo que parte de lo que hay que hacer es pensar qué tipo de verde es el verde que puede estar, y también que mientras más árboles y mientras más verde hay, más llueve en los lugares. O sea, ahí es donde se atrae el agua, lo cual es muy importante. Y nosotros no tenemos un problema de falta de agua en la ciudad, y eso siempre lo dice Rafael. Llueve más o menos 6 veces la cantidad de agua que consumimos. Entonces no es que falte agua, es que no la usamos de una forma apropiada, ¿no? Definitivamente tienes toda la razón en que hay que tener más área de absorción. Los mantos acuíferos deben de ser, pues tener más agua otra vez. Eso definitivamente no es un problema, pero es la gestión del agua el problema que tenemos, ¿no? Creo que ese es el foco, ver cómo hacemos que toda esa agua se utilice de forma correcta.
Well, a student concern is about the use of water and other materials for green buildings. So he has some doubts on using some materials that might be better used for recovering underground reservoirs, especially in the context of Mexico City, where there's a need of maybe reducing the size of the city rather than focusing on the specific buildings that are built in a more sustainable way. So he would like to pick up your mind on that as well.
No, I think your thoughts are well spoken. The pandemic has made us ask the question, does everyone have to be in the same place? And one of the issues that cities have is by bringing enormous amounts of people, we consume all the resources in that area. And if the city is placed in the wrong place, there may not be enough resources when the city grows. So Mexico City, 100 years ago, with the underwater aqueducts and aquifers, had enough. but now a city of 22 million does not have enough. So yes, there are always concerns to conserve and not waste, but it's hard to create water. So the question now, the pandemic raises, is there another way that Mexico City can operate as a capital, an industrial, and commercial hub? But can you do that and have people not be here all the time? So many cities now are talking about how the pandemic has taught us that we can have people working in other places. So there might be regions within, let's say, 100 miles of Mexico City, which have less demand on the infrastructure, have better aquifers. Why don't we consider using the digital connectivity and communication and develop those cities and minimize the impact on these cities, on the main city? So you can imagine if the region now became not a, we use the term 15-minute city, imagine it became an hour city. You take the 22 million people of Mexico and you push them out. And you allow them to sort of develop the water resources, water management better there, not to make the major demand here. And then use essentially this new method of communication so that we can draw down from the resources in a more logical and less wasteful way. So I think one of the things that you face in the future is what is the city, what is the urban environment with this additional requirement. So I think your point is that if you look at it as it is today, you will continue to have the fight and be unsuccessful. You need to essentially say the equation has many factors. You have to say one factor is more important than this factor. Not everybody has to be here. The conditions are such that we have to move to a different level of construction in other locations. So that's what master planning and land use is about. And that's what government policy is about. How do you make a better world which offers all the amenities and all the human rights that you need, but in a way that is sustainable? That's where the sustainable comes in. So we keep having babies and we keep making cars and we need to sort of find a solution. So I will come back in 10 years and you will tell me the answer.
¿Alguna otra pregunta antes de que empiece yo? Porque si no... ¿Sí? Sí, sí, adelante. Steph.
I just want to add something about the digitalization aspect that you were talking about, and the gentrification it's causing here in Mexico City, and the negative implication it has on the housing prices and in our economy, and yeah, especially about the renting. I thought about it because you were saying about the digitalization and that it decreases the CO2 emissions and people were like moving less, but it also causes that these so-called digital nomads that live in Mexico City, and the negative, especially the negative implication it makes in our economy. And I wanted to ask if in New York City it happened like back in the day, the same thing about gentrification that is happening here in Mexico City right now.
Yes, I mean, not only in New York City, but in any developing urban environment, there are those who have money and those who don't have money. And those who have money, create conditions and seize opportunities, which many times are at the detriment of people who don't have money. So the housing inequity and economic inequity certainly is in New York. I'm actually doing a workshop on socialized housing in Austria in May to talk about the socialized system that they use in Austria as opposed to the free market system we use in New York, and how it essentially, the Austrians have managed to provide a system which has great limitations, which I can explain later, based upon governmental regulations and entitlement, so that there really is very little, I would say, housing which is below standard. And it also allows people to stay in their housing and use their expanding income for more beneficial factors. again, coming back to the question of how do you create equitable housing, which is everybody's question now. Part of it is, A, the government incentive to say that it is a personal right to have quality housing, and that the market has to be adjusted in such a way that there's some kind of guarantee. And in New York, we have struggled with it. We use the American system uses a trickle down. I'm going into the other part of my brain here to get the answer to this. New York City uses a trickle down economy concept. So better neighborhoods come, people move to the better neighborhoods. The older neighborhoods become more affordable, and people move into those. So there's a lateral movement of people up and down. Up and down to get to the location. What the people who are hurt the most are the people at the very bottom, because that means the housing they get is that's least desirable, least cared for. New York attempted before until World War II to have public housing, which was, New York has the largest public housing system, I think, in the world. And it has almost, I think, almost 1 million units. But New York is unable to maintain the quality. So they, by de facto, have become government slums. So, and the price tag to repair them is extraordinary. So now the city is going to programs to offer those housing projects to developers to rebuild them and to make profit out of it. So the question you have is a universal question, which you all deal with. And urban areas are particularly suspect to that. If I had the answer, I'd be emperor, I guess. But I'd love to talk about this further because it's something I'm interested in.
Yo tengo dos preguntitas, pero Brenda, sí. Sí.
Well, this is going to be hard.
That's going to be hard. I know.
This is going to be hard.
Yeah. That's a good word of advice. I know her.
In English or first in Spanish, so everybody can. Oh.
Spanish first.
Spanish first.
Yes,
Okay.
Spanish.
Bueno, yo quisiera preguntarle al profesor, yo soy diseñadora industrial, entonces también tiene un poco que ver, ¿no?, con la parte de arquitectura, de diseño, y en el ámbito del diseño para la sustentabilidad, creo que justo de la ecuación que él propone, de lo más importante es la primera parte, el para qué, vamos a construir, vamos a hacer, para qué y quiénes son los beneficiarios, ¿no? Entonces yo le quiero preguntar justo de este replanteamiento de su ecuación y si no tendría que todavía considerar otras variables y por qué solamente, o sea, ¿qué pasa si en estas ecuaciones se sigue considerando nada más al ser humano como el principal, como el principal componente, ¿no?, de la ecuación? Creo que ahí también viene el problema, porque si solamente está considerado todo esto para el ser humano, entonces no va a cuadrar una ecuación en donde no nada más está el ser humano en un planeta que no es estático, es un sistema vivo, ¿no? Entonces, ¿por qué no meterle también, no? Entonces, bueno, por ahí va. Okay, so it's a tough one. Sorry. So, I said that I am an industrial designer, so I'm also very into these topics, and I also read Cradle to Cradle, and it was my first book to be in these topics. And my question is well, I congratulate you for this formula. I think it's very interesting to have this equation, but I wanted to ask if the equation, if it needs like another consideration in the equation, as the first component is to rethink the building design, right? And I think that's crucial also in design. It's the very first question if we want to really do a sustainable solution. It's what for? Okay, another furniture. Okay, what for? What's really the need or the problem, or et cetera, right? Including all these things you said, like progress, prosperity, better, worth it, civilization, it's good. Yeah, okay, but for who? What is good? What is quality? What is progress? What is for whom? And if the equation still needs to be focused only in the human as the client of the planet. Yeah, but there are other clients, right? And there are other species. And what if we include in this equation other, not only the human being as if it's the only species in this earth, because the equation has to solve problems, right? And the scenario, it's a very complicated system, but it's alive, this system, and it's alive also because of other species. And if the equation is only centered in the human, we are lost. I think it's not going to solve as it's supposed to be. So how can we put other variables, other, you said coefficients, but not integrating only or focusing in the progress, prosperity, etc., for the humans? Because if it is so, I think, sorry,
No.
it's difficult.
No, again, I answer this only as you ask the question with a question of mine, how is this possible? The equation was created, I use the equation for my students. I try to use it as a methodology where someone could look at a problem and say, I need to create an equation to solve this problem. What is the solution I want? Clean air, more water, better living environment, affordable housing. Then I say, what are all the things that I need to solve to get this? So what are all the, so I start to list, and part of that, my students, is the growing awareness of all the things that impact, in a positive or negative way, the solution that I wish to have. So that's the origin of the equation. It's a metaphor. Am I still back? Are you with me over there? Okay. So the question you have is, each of us has a responsibility and an interest in some part of the world, And I'd like to think that within the context of the 6 billion people in the world, there's enough people who are interested in all the problems that we have. So each of us has the ability to take the problem that we think is valuable and apply the equation to it and successfully execute the equation, then civilization will move forward in a positive way. So yes, you may look at a chair and say, there's a certain group of people who are female, who are between the ages of 20 and 40, are going to have a baby, and they need the chair to do the following things. And most other women won't need it after 50, and most won't. So that's the problem. Let me design a chair. So if I went to look for the chair, I said, I don't need that chair. But somebody else would. You would have solved that problem. But if there were 100, 1,000 designers of chairs, each of you designing a chair for that thing, this chair, that chair, we would cover all of civilization. And the bigger problems would get more solutions. So we would hope that affordable housing would have more people thinking about it than unaffordable housing. That the rich would have enough people to deal with their houses, but we would need more people designing houses for the people who can't afford it. So it would be that. So my hope, and it's a hope, that, that smart people who are well-intentioned, regardless of what the rest of the world is doing, will identify those problems that have to be solved, and we will put the resources of universities like this to that solution. And then we will say, we have it, let's do it. So, and that's how civilization has always progressed. And I know for us, and this is off the record, it's become harder in the last couple of months to think that way. But I've hoped that that will be the way we conduct our lives, and certainly that's the way we give value to our lives and we give value to our fellows. So yes, we can save the pandas, and we can save the people, save the polar bear, save the people.
I actually have a follow-up question on that, precisely on that, because I think by nature,
and that's why we're all. For those of us who are teachers, that's kind of why we're teachers.
yes. So I'm kind of excused in front of my question, because I believe by nature an equation has two universal characteristics. The first one is that it is universal. So an equation has to work here, in New York, in China, or anywhere in the world. And the second characteristic of an equation is that it's open for modifications. So even the most transcendental equations in the world and the history of science have been object of modifications and improvement. And I myself have been working on my own equation on transformation, and it's just a real struggle on coming up with something as profound as an equation, and I congratulate you for that. I think it's really good, and it's open for modifications and improvement as well. But what I would like to highlight is the way you started your talk. It all started with the Industrial Revolution, and then it went down from there. And there is one specific moment in human history where we all got aware of what was going on, and it's COVID. And I love this comparison between the impact, the global systemic impact of Industrial Revolution and the global systemic impact of COVID. And my question would be, what would take for an equation like yours, or to that matter of mine as well, to massify it? Because we need it, right? So what would take, do we need a massive system-wide change like COVID or the Industrial Revolution, even though Industrial Revolution wasn't for sustainability and nature benefit? What do we need to massify this? Because I would say, just like our student mentioned in his question, one thing is to be working on designing better and more sustainable buildings, but another one is designing a more sustainable society. And that is much more profound, but it's complementary to the design of the building. So that's my question. What would be needed for
First
that
of all,
kind of skill?
let me point out to students, in our best days as teachers, this is what we do. We sit around, we ask this kind of question of ourselves, we try to baffle each other about how do we get to the end game? How do we do this? So let me make one point about the equation. One of the great challenges in physics, I have an engineering degree in physics, is a battle between Newtonian physics and relativity. Newtonian physics breaks down when it gets to relativity. So all the rules that govern our lives on the planet day to day are well scripted by Newton. But those rules break down when we move at different speeds and different locations. So we live in two different realities. The reality we have to deal with in a day, but the curiosity to find the universal truth that deals with everything. So I say we always will chase the universal truth. But what we need, since we have limited lifespans and God or the Creator is only given us time, is to deal with those things that we can manage to make our life better now. So I think we will always be looking for the universal rule. But the equations, the Newtonian equations to solve the problem we have now and to minimize suffering or make things better, is what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And when we're together in the evening having drinks, we all look for the universal truth to solve it. So I don't think I'll make it to the universal truth, but I think I'll try my best to have a couple of Newtonian solutions in there, kind of thing. So that's just my philosophy, not. And the Industrial Revolution, I don't want to blackball the Industrial Revolution. It is the great achievement of mankind. Our health, our devices, our ability to go to the moon, all based on the Industrial Revolution. It's just on the side, there's a lot of trash that comes out of the Industrial Revolution, and we need to sort of clean that up if we want to keep going down. I think we've scared all the students.
Even myself.
Any other questions, comments?
Tú tenías dos, ¿no? Brent, no?
No.
Okay, I think it's a big challenge, but I would encourage not only our students but my colleagues, my friends from the department, from the university, to think about equations, because just as I mentioned, I think we must believe that there has to be a solution or a set of different solutions to the worst and most critical crisis that we've ever faced in human history, which is the move to
It's to get to the next step of human.
yes. So it's having a bad Anthropocene. Moving towards this new geological area that doesn't look bright in the future. So that would be like, I don't know if Maria, you have any closing remarks?
Well, I would like to say that as an architect myself, I know how hard it is for us to move away from the built environment and to think about society. And I think that is a great contribution from you to start thinking, because it is much more difficult to change society's behaviors. And I think that is like taking responsibility, as Kevin just said, like it has become more difficult in the last 2 months due to the worldwide events and people in power. So it is much more difficult now to see a light at the end of the tunnel, but we have to start by changing our own behaviors and by understanding where we are at. For example, in this campus, there is a project to build a new building. Do we really need that building? Do we really need to produce another space, or we can optimize the buildings that we have already and make it more sustainable, better used? So those are the kind of questions, like even from in our own institution, we face these challenges and these questions all the time, and I am totally against building anything. So we need to rethink how we inhabit this planet and how we want to continue inhabiting it. So I really would like to thank Kevin for making us think about these things and think about what the built environment does and how we can make it better, and also how everyone here how we can produce a better planet for ourselves and for future generations if we come to that, because that's even in question. So thank you very much.
No, thank you. It's my honor to be here. I'm delighted to come, and it's always fun to meet new people and to hear their ideas, and it gives me great joy and confidence when I sit and meet another group of students and other faculty who have the same expectations, the same desires, the same ambitions. I will say it's fun. I mean, I know it sometimes looks black. What's the fun of everything being solved? What's the fun of everything being done? The fun is to go ahead and to do things now and to solve things and to meet other people who have like minds. I mean, I have an old friend who sits over there who I've traveled the world.
Tiene que estar.
No, no, sí, ya. ¿Ya? Ahora sí. Te voy a hablar en español, mi querido Kevin. ¿No? Okay. Then it'll be in English. Yeah. You're very, very welcome, dear Kevin. We had a work that we were doing in the world-class, world city universities, and that I enjoyed very much being with you. And the possibility of exchanging between architects, engineers, biomedicals, it was very, very interesting to have that opportunity in the what we called it WC2, but in Mexico WC shouldn't be used. But thank you very much. It is very interesting, and I find this, the situation with the equation, it is, it is involving us, involving engineers with architects, what I think is the most difficult part of the equation is the coefficients. How you determine each coefficient. It is very difficult to give different things, different importance. Well, thank you very much, Kevin. I'm delighted to be here and hope to see you 2 or 3 more hours. Okay.